What if it didn't happen? I think it's a difficult one because we might have a mindset that sort of frames it in a particular way. Like, well, God had them walking in a garden and he walked with them in the garden and they tended and cultivated the garden. Okay. So would have that been life forever? I don't think so. Because as they increased in number, would everyone have been walking around in a garden all day, every day? I don't think so. I think the creativity that we have in God would, the infrastructure of the planet wouldn't have coped with 50 billion people all walking around naked in a garden. I don't think that was the intention that God will have that continued. Now, the relationship of a garden and our engagement with creation to tend and cultivate it would have continued, but I think we would have actually grown, lived in places, not just slept out on the grass or whatever. It doesn't say where Adam and Eve slept, does it? Just as they walked with God in the cool of the day and they were told to tend and cultivate the garden. Did they sleep in a hammock? Who knows? We don't know. But in reality, I think if they hadn't have chosen independence, in which then they had to come up with their own solution to the world's problems of increase in population and all of that stuff, I think we would have created things rather than made things. So we've made things out of wood, stone, metal, which we had to work at the sweat of our brow to produce. And the evil of hard work and labor in a way which is independent of God, which makes you weary and heavy laden. An evil word, poneros, evil means hard labor, hardship, toil, sweat, and actually God didn't intend us to live that way. So let's say the population increased and there was, went from hundreds to thousands to hundreds of thousands. I believe that they would have learned to create things to live in. And I think they would have been they would have been made out of not the earth or the trees or anything else. They would have been a product, because most of what our material is today and our rocks are the result of sedimentation and igneous activity of volcanic activity, which there wouldn't have been if there was no fall. So it wouldn't have had that material. Therefore, there wouldn't have been molten iron within rocks in the same way that there is now. So what would we have done? Well, if we had continued to ascend into sonship, we would have done like the Father did. He called things that be not as if they are. So creatively, free from any negative ways of thinking, I believe we would have had beautiful structures created by choice to live in and to grow in, and we would have had energy and water and food and everything else we needed without the toil, labor, and hardship that we have got to in producing that, and therefore the society which is based on materialism and greed and the economy controlled by those who want more and more money and people being poor. There would have been no poverty. There would have been no one who had more money than anyone else, because money wouldn't have existed. Money only reflects the value of your work. If you do things because it's who you are, you don't need to be paid a monetary value on that, because you value who you are and the time you take to do something.
Yes.
Therefore, our whole mindset would have been different. And it's one of those things you can't go back and think. Well, you can. I think about it a lot, because I think about, well, what is our future going to be if we come back to that restored state? If I'm going to create things in the future, how am I going to encourage that to flourish and live and whatever? So I do think about it. And I think, if we had the thing over how things work and how things operate, then they would be under our direction, not the other way around. So the certain laws, scientific laws that exist, and the quantum mechanical way that things can be observed and created, we would have used that to form things out of light, and they would have been beautiful, and they would have been perfectly functional, and we would have had buildings that looked very differently from our buildings today, which we're using out of material. And we may well have lived in ways which are very different from today, but I think we would have also by now been on other moons and planets, and we would have expanded because we had access to the gateways that took us to other planets and took us around the universe, and we would have taken that place of peace and joy once we had completely heavenized, if you like, this planet. We would have continued to other planets, and we would have increased and multiplied and taken God's government of peace out into all the other things, and the dimensions also. We would have been able to engage those dimensions in a way which we've not been able to, because of the nature of our fall and the fact that our fall affected those other dimensions in negative ways, which wouldn't have done because it wouldn't have happened. So it's sort of a huge topic to think about what would it have been like if that hadn't have happened. But I do it sometimes, and people ask questions about it sometimes, and I think, well, we can't come from our present understanding and try and do it in a way that leans to our understanding, which has been created out of our past experience, because we wouldn't have had those past experiences. And actually those past experiences are us doing the best we can in our own strength, independently of God. And I'm not saying some of the things we've done aren't beautiful and have been amazing, because we are creative and we're made in the image of God, and therefore we still are reflecting some of that in what we're doing. But the way it functions is absolutely not how God intends. You know, the way people live within the societies that we've created, where there's such inequality, where there's such degradation and sickness and disease and poverty and all of those things, there would have been none of that. Therefore, you know, life would have been very different. And I believe if we're going to see restoration, then we need to be thinking differently rather than making things better using what we have as a basis. Let's start thinking about how we would create something completely different, rather than, oh, well, we're going to redeem these 7 mountains of culture that we've created. We're not, because I don't believe those 7 mountains of culture were God's idea in the first place. So we may have mountains of creational things that we might be involved in, but I believe they will be very different when we think differently, and therefore we've got to have our minds renewed so that we're not replicating the mistakes that we made when we did all these things in the past. Because as much as we've increased in technology and everything else, there's still huge poverty. There's still major diseases. There's still people dying all over the world through malaria and other things. If malaria was in New York or Washington, I guarantee there would be a completely malarial-free country. But because it's in Africa, the incentive to actually do it is not there, because it's not affecting us. And I think that sort of amounts to the selfishness in which we live. We live in societies which are very self-centered and are not thinking in terms of the whole. And therefore, I think that would be very different. And our mindsets and belief systems towards how we live would be very different. And we wouldn't have all the political systems and all of the things we've made to try and manage an imperfect society in an imperfect world. We would be living in a completely different way. And I think we should be thinking about how we could live heaven on earth, rather than how can we repair and make it better, the things we've done. There's got to be a better solution to it, not I'm looking at society and what can we put in place to make this society better. If you enjoy these videos, would you please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe? It really does help. Thank you very much.